Welcome to Press Review, the show from Reaction, where the Reaction editors and star columnists pick the stories that have grabbed us in the last 7 days or so and discuss them. It's a special edition today, I'm delighted to say, because I'm joined by my colleague, the great Tim Marshall, author, expert on geopolitics, and we're going to have a spin through the stories which really caught our attention in the last few days. The first thing I wanted to highlight actually was your piece this morning, Tim, for Reaction on Bosnia, where there's trouble brewing.
There is. It's been simmering for a while. It hasn't boiled over, but the heat's being turned up, if you want to continue the analogy. I mean, I'm an old, one of those old hacks that said, oh, yes, when I was in Bosnia in the 1990s. And that generation of foreign correspondents, have never really let go of that. We've always kept a weather eye on it. And it's gone through some difficult times, Bosnia. And the Dayton Accords of 95, most people agreed, only froze the conflict. They didn't create the architecture to solve the underlying tensions in the conflict. And so those tensions are still there. And then this summer, a number of things happened. Over the past few years, President Putin in Russia, who is a big supporter of Republika Srpska, that's the Serb part of the divide in Bosnia, he's given at least 4,000 assault rifles to the Bosnian Serb police and some other heavy weapons that a police force doesn't really need. So what's going on there? Milorad Dodik is the president of the Republika Srpska part of Bosnia. And he appears to be creating a quasi-military police force. That's always been worth keeping an eye on. And then in the last couple of weeks, he suddenly said that by the end of this month, and it could be a bluff, he will create a Bosnian Serb army. Now, that is against the Dayton Accords. He further says that therefore the Bosnian army barracks, the Bosnian army is about 10,000 men and women, and they're made up of the 3 different communities of Bosnia. Well, the barracks of the national army that are in the Bosnian Serb area, Republika Srpska, he said they would have to clear out. And of course, my new army will go in. They could not let that slip. The Bosnian army would have to say no. So would the EU, the High Representative, at which point that spark could cause guns to be fired. And that's why it's worth keeping an eye on. I mean, there's a lot more to it, obviously, there always is than that. But that was what really caught my attention. And I just wanted to write about it because I do think the alarm bells are ringing. I don't want to be a Cassandra. I don't want to say the Bosnia war is about to break out again. I'm not making that argument. I'm making the argument that it is more tense now than it has been for some time. And that if this threat is carried out, it's difficult to see how there wouldn't be some form of violence that would break out.
Yeah, and it's as you said in the piece. If you're a member of Reaction, you can read that piece. If you're not a member of Reaction, go to the link below and you can become a member. You get Tim's column, you get my weekly newsletter, all sorts of other stuff from the Reaction team. And you said in that piece that the EU, the Europeans, the Brits should think about sending some troops. Of course,
sorry, go on.
Of course, there are. It's not as you know better than anyone. And I've written about this. It's not just Bosnia in isolation, is it? No. This is the big story behind this is what Putin is up to, and we're going to come on to talk about stories on Ukraine and Belarus. In fact, let's go to the Ukraine first. And there's a splash in the Telegraph on Friday morning, which is essentially the US warning, the Telegraph out of London reports, warning the Europeans, the EU, that Putin might be about to invade Ukraine, whether that means full invasion or just take more, but take more territory. They think that this, unlike previous occasions where tensions have been rising, that something might be about to happen. What did you make of it, Tim?
On the journalistic sort of press review side of it, it's a bold move by the Telegraph to splash it on the front page, because most people know about the story. The Americans have warned, and there's been a flurry of diplomatic activity. Kamala Harris was warning Macron about it when she was in Paris last week. Biden's briefed the EU commissioner about president, sorry, about it, etc., etc. All sorts of briefings have been going on. But of course, we have been there before. Putin has marched his troops to the top of the hill, and then he's marched them down again, not because of any threat, just because he was poking and prodding. Mm-hmm. So it's bold by the Telegraph to splash on it because he might be doing that again. On the other hand, there are reasons to think this is a little bit different, and there are many reasons. One is really hard to quantify, and that is that after Afghanistan, I think many of us have been waiting for where Russia will test the resolve, notably of the Americans, because I think we know that the EU doesn't have much resolve in these matters. The conclusion that I drew from Afghanistan was not that it's all over for the Americans, but that they will start to focus and concentrate on what they do care about. Hence, I think, this warning. So that's the sort of macro picture. On the ground, I looked at who's moving what where. The Americans have put 2 warships into the Black Sea, which has really annoyed. It's international waters, but it's really annoyed the Russians. I'm not sure if the Brits have got one there or not. The British, as the newspapers have, it was in the Sun, the Mail, the Times today, the British reconnaissance plane did go quite close to Russian airspace. It was 30 miles, international airspace. It's allowed to be there. Russians put up a fighter jet. It went away. And it is a spy plane. There's no question about it. It finds electronic signals and it can work out where they've come from and try and decode them. And it's a spy plane, no question. More interestingly, what's happening on the Russian side, the 9,000 to 10,000 troops they're putting up near the Ukrainian border are proper fighting combat troops. And then I looked even closer at it. Some of them are from the 1st Guards Tank Army. The 1st Guards are usually up above, near where Belarus comes down towards Lithuania and Poland, that little gap there that separates Kaliningrad from Belarus. They're usually up there, and it's called the Smolensk Gate. The 1st Army's up there. Well, they've moved down, that's almost 500 kilometers. What is that tank unit doing down there? I don't know. They're an exercise. They're allowed. It's part of Russia. But it's just sort of, that's different. The language from the Americans, they've stated that our security guarantee to Ukraine is ironclad. That's a pretty strong word. It's messaging. And then the story you've got, Iain, for reaction, that the Brits, it looks like next week, are going to beef up the defense cooperation. Mm-hmm. Now, that's your story. My understanding of what it might be about could be extra surface-to-surface missiles. Yeah. I don't know the detail, but that makes sense. And possibly there might be something. There's already a naval agreement. We are not a treaty ally that has to come to their defense. They're not in NATO, but it does seem from your story that the ties are about to get closer. And why now? And I think we know why now. It's messaging to say we will push back if you do what may or may not happen.
And I think there's frustration that the Ukrainians are really pretty isolated and feeling it, and with the EU preoccupied with the Belarus situation and the EU unprepared to be too tough on Putin for reasons that we understand, because Germany, effectively without a government at the moment, is in a position where it relies on Russian gas, and then the alternative.
And who did Putin call 2 or 3 days ago? Merkel. That was the phone call. He picked up the phone for Germany. And you're right, they are a bit of a weak link in a robust response to that. The Baltic states want more of a robust response. Nobody wants war, but they don't want to invite on aggression. And then this is, again, going back to this thing about post-Afghanistan. Without question, the Chinese and the Russians will prod and push. I would if I was them. I'm not condemning them necessarily for their actions. They're entirely logical. Yeah.
And you've got a situation which is the timing could not be more perfect for Putin, because you've got that German political situation which I described, where it's essentially German politics is frozen as they try and form a new coalition, and they move to the post-Merkel era and don't necessarily want a fight with Russia. Then the situation with France, which is also weird, because the Russian-French relations have always been an interesting subject, but the President Macron takes a very particular view that the long-term future is a rapprochement, a good working relationship with Russia, that Russia is a serious European power. You have to take it seriously, and you can't view it in narrowly Cold War terms. So to the Ukrainians, that means you can't look for any serious help to the EU or to Germany or France. So your options then are, as you described, Tim, the US, but also the UK, which has been since 2016 forging closer defence links. And I think my understanding of what's about to happen as early as next week is that there are two parts to it connected. Firstly, is some form of bolstering the existing defence pact and cooperation pact. Whether or not it offers guarantees, it's just something to signal that Britain is engaged and prepared to act in some way, or prepared to defend Ukraine. And then the second is some form of arms deal or additional military support. There's also a complication of one cause that Putin might use is this argument, I think headed through the Ukrainian courts, about debts which the Russians say the Ukrainians owe to Russia, but the Ukrainians say, well, that was a previous government and it was extracted almost under duress. It was a kind of hostage-style situation. So there's that excuse which Putin has. So if he's thinking in terms of timing, there's a lot lined up. Which if he really does want to act and he has problems at home, then there's potential there. So I think that is what's particularly worrying the British and the Americans. And the Americans growing, I understand, increasingly exasperated with the European Union and Europe's failure to lead. And that talks again to your Bosnia piece, Tim, where you made the point that these things happen, and then afterwards you get some grandstanding from countries that won't spend their foreign ministers make grand speeches about the common European defence interests and the common European home, but it's too late by then.
Which is what happened in 91 when it was clear Yugoslavia was falling apart. Jacques Pouz, the Luxembourg foreign prime minister, who was a big player in the EU, was saying the hour of Europe has arrived. And it was Jacques Delors who told the Americans, we wouldn't interfere in your area, and we think you should respect not interfering in ours. In other words, don't worry, we're going to sort Yugoslavia out. And then 100,000 deaths later, it took the Americans coming in to stop it. Ditto, more or less, Bosnia, Kosovo as well. Yeah. Sorry, let me try and bring a whole bunch of stuff together based on what you just said. Putin has given them in Bosnia thousands of rifles. He's met the president of Republika Srpska, I think 5 or 6 times in the last 6 or 7 years. This is a little area which is, the population is smaller than Yorkshire. Putin doesn't go and meet the mayor of Leeds once a year. There's a reason why he's putting it, because he does not want Bosnia in NATO, which could be a long-term deal. And lots of other reasons that he's playing, he's involving himself, and there is a risk of violence. You mentioned Macron. Now, Macron's right. You should try to have a rapprochement with Russia. And mistakes have been made in the past, including the manner of the advancing of NATO up to Russia's borders. There were hybrid ways of doing that, of getting, because the populations of these countries voted in governments that said we want to join NATO. That's democracy. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't have come into NATO, but there could have been a more gentle way where, yes, you can be in NATO, but we say we're not going to put any foreign troops or American hardware on your territory for 10 years. You're still in NATO. You still got the Article 5 guarantee. So it could have been done differently. So Macron's right. But where I think he's wrong is that if you find naked aggression, which we have found, and poisoning people on other people's soil, and all the other things that Russia does under Putin, you have to push back, because if you don't, you're just saying, please, could you beat us again? Could you, with a big stick? And the Baltics know that, the Poles know that, but the two big countries, France and Germany, notably Germany, don't. And yeah, Biden is absolutely fed up with it. And it's part of that even bigger divide of the Americans saying across the world, can you please do some more here? Because we need to do some more over here. And if you want to decouple Europe from America, then don't take care of issues in your own backyard. And at the moment, we're not.
Yeah. So I want to next highlight a story from The Economist, which I think we're probably going to critique or even criticize. Though I have to say I'm back reading The Economist regularly and enjoying it, actually, after a long period where I wasn't, or sort of lost the habit. Sure, that's polite enough, isn't it? Lost the habit during the whole Brexit wars. But there's a piece on the Belarus situation which is headlined "A Scheme to Use Migrants to Split the EU is Likely to Backfire." I think the reason I highlight it is I think it's a slightly quixotic, unusual.
Backfire on Belarus, you mean?
Well, yeah. So it's saying it's overdone, this idea of Alexander Lukashenko, of course, the leader of Putin-backed leader of Belarus. The idea that he's some master tactician, and you should explain, Tim, what he's doing on the border, the way he's exploiting the border, and what he's doing with.
I think he's a tactician. I'm not sure he's a strategist. I mean, I've always argued that Putin is both. Lukashenko looks more like one crisis to the next. Yeah, sorry. But there is actually a relationship. Sorry.
Yeah, the contention is that actually that the EU is toughening up its position, and that Merkel, which is true, has asked Russia's president to talk Mr. Lukashenko out of his plotting. The EU's hinting at fresh sanctions.
Why would he do that?
Well, as they say, chances of success seem slim. But I just think it's a slightly unusual take in that he's in a very strong position because he has this enormous thing next door called Russia, which is clearly intimately involved in the policy that he's prosecuting, and in the EU, which, as we've just described, is divided.
There's already sanctions on Belarus because of the election that he allegedly stole last year, and the brutal manner in which he put down the opposition, and lots of other things. It is clear, incontrovertible, surely, that, well, we know he's given thousands and thousands of visas to desperate people from other parts of the world, flown them in to Minsk, stuck them on buses and put them up to the border both of Lithuania and Poland, and then started to push them across to try and cause a crisis, and he has. I don't necessarily think that Putin rang him up and told him to do it, but Putin's quite happy, to see the EU in as much turmoil as possible. Completely suits him. And I'm trying to connect it back to Ukraine, but by the way, Ukraine has moved 8,500 border police and National Guard up to the Belarus border, because a lot of the border of Ukraine and Belarus, it's very sort of swampy, fields, forests. It's not a hard border that you can patrol. They've relied on the terrain, but of course people are so desperate they may try and come through that terrain. So it's not a good thing having all these thousands and thousands of people with guns moving around. You've got the Belarus and the Russians on military exercises. You've got the Russians moving down to the Ukraine border. You've got the Ukrainians on alert on their border. You've got the Ukrainians moving in. This is not a good thing. Sorry, but to this piece, which I haven't read, but if the contention is that this could backfire, what's to backfire on Lukashenko? Will he be even further isolated from the people he's completely isolated from already? If that's possible, yes. More sanctions, maybe, and the people of Belarus are suffering. But I remember the people of Iraq suffering for about 15 years under Saddam and sanctions. So is that how long we're going to give it? Who's got the bigger cards to play here? Well, 20% of Europe's gas, I think it is, it might just be Germany's, one of the two, comes through the pipelines that come from Belarus. And he's saying, I might turn those off. And it is getting a bit cold. Also, I might turn this tap of people on even more. So I just think that those two cards are probably better cards at the moment than anything the EU has.
And also moving into winter.
Yeah.
The winter hasn't properly
and more people are going to die. And the Poles are damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. If they do something about it and open the door, they may open the floodgates, and then the population, which already is very concerned about this, may turn against the government. And if they don't, if they beat them back, they are universally condemned for brutality. And again, this is something that, they've worked this out in Minsk and Moscow. It's lose-lose on this side of the border.
So I'm talking to Tim Marshall, reaction columnist and author, who's just showing again, he's absolutely right, how maps and geography really matter. If you're not familiar with his books, you certainly should be. Prisoners of Geography, The Power of Geography, and links to those below.
Iain, you're the editor, but let me ask you a question about a faraway country about which I know little. Which is Whitehall, and British politics. Well, because I know you've picked out. Is it the Spectator?
Yes, I have. Yeah. I have. I just have one thing to flag.
I beg your pardon.
No, it's okay. I'm going to put the link in below. But just in these sort of situations, I always find myself every day reading the stuff that comes through TASS. Which is a name to conjure with for those of us old enough to remember the Cold War.
Comrade.
And it's the way to see how things are reported.
Oh, I do this. I do this a lot. If I want to know what the Kremlin, not what their deep strategy is. There's no secrets. But if you watch Russia Today, which comes straight out of the Kremlin, you start to see what their take on it is, and you can see through it. What the Kremlin wants the take, and you can do it with other
the report this morning, very very intriguing in that it presents what's happening on the border with Ukraine as NATO aggression, obviously, and the business over the spy plane refueling. NATO presents NATO as a sort of warmongers spoiling for a fight, and I have a
tiny bit of sympathy in for that. I don't think we're aggressive. I don't think we're about to invade Russia. I don't think we're any threat to Russia. But I do understand where that comes from. It comes from a Russian psyche of a knowledge of history, of looking that way. And the Swedes came that way and invaded. The Poles invaded them. Napoleon invaded them. The Germans invaded them twice. Yeah. They say there was an agreement NATO wouldn't come up. It has done. So I don't excuse, the actions of the leadership of Russia, but I do understand that mindset and how easy it is to sell to your population who have that collective memory of those moments.
Well, that's what makes me wonder that's what makes me wonder if there is something bigger at play here, because as Putin, you said he's a tactician and a strategist. Is there he's obviously got some domestic problems at the moment, and a war or some kind of conflict, something just short of it, can sometimes be the solution for an autocrat. Do you think there's a big plan of his to essentially, whether it's to incorporate Belarus, take most of Ukraine, create something which he can retire at some point, eventually having recreated
He'll never retire.
Something like the Soviet Union?
Yes. But that doesn't mean he will do it. I mean, there is what you want and what you can have. So without question, if he could do X, Y, and Z, yeah, he would. Who wouldn't? And it is very roughly as follows. Push back against the Chinese influence in the Central Asian republics to make sure that you're the biggest dominant influence there in your near abroad. as they call it, but looking westwards, get the Baltic states back on side one way or another. That's a real priority. 100% make sure that there is a friendly president in Belarus. It doesn't have to be Lukashenko. He doesn't actually like Lukashenko, apparently. He dislikes him at a personal level. And the moment he's no longer useful to him, he's quite happy to have him thrown out as long as there's another pro-Moscow guy in.
Imagine Vladimir Putin regarding you as unlikable and too vulgar.
So to maintain your buffer between you and these people that used to invade you, which I don't think is a threat anymore, and Ukraine, another massive, massive part of this buffer. So what is achievable? If there is complete nothingness coming out of the Europeans and the Americans, then you could incorporate the Baltic states. I think that's too big a gamble, Article 5 NATO. Belarus, in the event that there was a revolution such as in Ukraine, it looked like Lukashenko, that it would flip. I think the Russian troops will cross the border and come to the Polish border. And at that point, you will amalgamate the two countries. He's already moved to, make them not an entity, but very deep connections. And there's ethnic Russians in Belarus, and the Russian constitution under him has been changed to say that they have a duty to protect them. Ditto in Ukraine. On Ukraine, militarily, you could probably get to the river in Kiev in about 3 days. They're big enough and good enough if they wanted to gamble that much and then have a protracted guerrilla war for decades, which they don't. So you'd like to do it, but you probably won't. But what is achievable, again, if there's no pushback, you probably know the Donbass region. That's the bit that the separatists, mostly ethnic Russians, took from Ukraine. It borders Russia, so there is that bit of buffer zone that Russia has now, and the rest of Ukraine remains Ukrainian, except for Crimea and the port of Sebastopol, which was essentially invaded and annexed, not recognized by hardly anybody. Well, again, look at the map and you'll see that the Donbass region, which is now under pro-Russian control, and Crimea, which is under Russian control, is separated only by about 100 miles of the coastline of the Sea of Azov and the port of Mariupol. If he really did go for it, if this buildup is real, if they cross the border, the temptation to race down and join Donbass via Mariupol to the Crimea might be too much to resist. End of stage 1. Very briefly, stage 2. In another few years, and this is just about what you might want to do, not what you will do. You can race up the coast of the Black Sea to Odessa, which is a majority Russian-speaking port, and you can join the whole lot up to Odessa. 20 years' time, let's just go up to Moldova, Transnistria, where 2,000 Russian troops hold out in Transnistria, part of Moldova. Now I've got the whole of that curve, and I'm feeling a lot better in Moscow now, a lot more comfortable. So, I think there is a big idea, but lots of us can have big ideas, but you can't always carry them out.
Fascinating. You're watching Reaction on YouTube. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction, you just click the subscribe button below. And if you want to become a member of Reaction, go to the link below to the main site, and you get my weekly newsletter, Tim's column, and lots of other great stuff from the Reaction team. Tim, I interrupted you, and you were going to ask me a question. About you
I just wanted you to
a small country or a small place of which
a faraway hall, which appears to be white, about which I know little. I'm aware of the Spectator front page, Court of Chaos. Obviously I do follow British politics, but not the way that you do.
Yeah.
And I'm aware that I thought up until now that Johnson, what appears to be Johnson's thinking, is that we can bulldoze our way through this and sort of ruffle our hair a bit and go like that, and it will go away. And he's been right almost every time. But sorry, I might as well hold it up. Other magazines are available. And I do get other magazines, I hasten to add.
It's a great cover. As I said something for the Spectator this week, it's amazing how much better the covers are compared to Boris's day. I mean, it's a brilliant
it's got that is it Ancien Régime and the Fin de siècle and Let Them Eat Cake and the masses and I don't care because there's Jacob. There's a lot going on there, and I haven't read it yet, but my understanding is it's a court of chaos. But is the idea, and do you agree with this, that actually this chaos is catching up with them now and actually could do for them in the long term?
I think it is, and it could. The piece is written by Fraser Nelson, obviously editor of the Spectator. It's a really good read, and it gets to the heart of the psychology of what's going on. And Boris is essentially, he's surrounded, as the piece says, by courtiers, and I mean there are some good people in there as well. But he's at that phase, always dangerous for leaders, where he doesn't like to hear no.
It took Blair 2 terms before he fell victim to knowing everything.
Yeah, and you just fall victim to this idea that those who are putting up obstacles, or you start to see even people asking questions as oppositionalism, as somehow they're not with the program, and that's a consequence of it happens to most leaders eventually. But that's just being prime minister is very draining and is very hard work, even for someone like Boris, who has an unusual approach to the job. It is really tough. So when people raise their hand and say maybe that won't work, or maybe X is not a good idea because Y will happen, you just think, well, come on, you're just an irritant. You're kind of getting in the way. And it's on that basis that the Paterson disaster happened, which is the decision by the Prime Minister, and it was his decision, not the Chief Whip's decision. It's been made clear at Westminster to charge ahead and try and defend Boris.
What happens to people? Sorry, what happens to intelligent people? Because the guy clearly super bright. When I was in full-time journalism, in the newsroom is not a democracy. It is a form of dictatorship because the editor has the final say, and you can go with that or not. I used to take the approach that if on not many occasions, if I disagreed with the editor and was asked for my opinion, I would quite happily say, look, I actually think, we shouldn't be doing this, and we should be doing this, and here's why. But then making it clear so I didn't get fired that, however, if we're going to go down that way, I am part of a team and I will then follow it and do it. Mm-hmm. But I'm not frightened to say, I actually think this is wrong. And I can't see why an intelligent leader wouldn't want people like that, and wouldn't actually know that they could get themselves boxed into their kitchen cabinet and their little world. But it does seem to happen over and over again.
But that's originally one of the reasons he did have Cummings, to a lesser extent Lee Kane running the press and communications side. But they were prepared to say no to him, and much more than no, actually. So he ended up feeling that they were, so it is said, that they were running him, and that they thought that they were that Dom thought that he was running the government.
But there were those rumours that actually they were actually trying to undermine him behind the back. Whereas my approach is that you make your piece and you say, okay, I'll now get behind this. So I can understand if people are pushed out if they're actually trying to undermine. But I mean, I don't know the inner staff the way you do. There's only one person that I'm actually familiar with, and he's a brilliant mind, and I'm very confident would not be supine in the face of idiocy. But is that what's happening?
There are a few, but also remember that the way that Number 10 works, the way that the government works, is it is a rolling machine where, and you don't have to accept Dom Cummings' critique of, and you're right actually. He admits now in his writings on his Substack that they were trying to undermine the Prime Minister, or they were trying to sideline the Prime Minister so that, as he saw it, sensible people could get on with taking decisions. A bizarre position in a democracy, and very dangerous.
What is he, Rasputin now? Yeah.
There is this part of the job of the civil service, as it sees it, and the establishment machine, is to try and just carry on the business of government, so that business is transacted, and it's transacted by various meetings, memos, bits of paper, boxes, and for a cabinet secretary and senior officials, they don't want punch ups in number 10 or arguments or disagreement. They want the thing to flow smoothly, particularly when you have a prime minister like this prime minister, who can be quite erratic or capricious, or make a sudden decision like the one he made on Paterson, where he just decided effectively to just sort of tear the plaster off and just say, right, okay, not only defend Owen Patterson, try and change the rules that govern the standards regime. A complete disaster. Where I think the real damage is done. So there's two parts to it. There's the public perception, don't know yet, and it's the most kind of boring thing that people say about politics at the moment, and I think it's really cynical, is it's all priced in, none of it really matters, because everyone knows that Boris is a controversial character who makes mistakes.
No.
I just don't. I think
there's limits to that.
Yeah, long term, you can't really defy political gravity, and this government is half the way through its term.
I read your column in the Times yesterday, which is alluding to this. Was it William Hague who's had a piece as well this week? I mean, is the Conservative press, is there a real klaxon coming from it about this?
I think yes, there is. I mean, it shouldn't be overstated. The government is not about to fall.
No.
But what's just happened has, I think, a couple of very, very big policy implications. But what's happened in Parliament, so there's the public side of things, and then I think what really matters is the impact on the Tory parliamentary party.
You were writing yesterday, weren't you, that they're muttering, you know what, I'm checking everything these guys are doing because I don't want to get thrown under the bus and they look like a fool.
Yeah. And if you're an MP, you're now you're in a relatively marginal seat, or even a seat with 4,000 or 5,000 majority, you're now starting to think, right, when's the general election? What's my opponent going to say on their leaflets? What am I vulnerable to? You're watching the sort of local coverage. And so you just have to be very careful that you're not set up in the way that they feel that they were betrayed over the past.
This is a press review, Ian. So, I mean, I've got my head stuck usually in some subscription website from some obscure think tank, and I don't actually look across the media the way you do. You've said that there is something of a klaxon, and the Tory MPs are obviously reading it. If so, does the inner circle in Downing Street look at this array of media and the headlines and whatever's going on in Sky and News at 10 or whatever? Can they really just do this bluster, the Boris bluster, and just push through it? Or don't they have to course correct and say, and does he look at all this stuff? Has he got time? I mean, I know that they live their lives in 15-minute chunks at that level.
I think so. Yeah, he, as I understand it, he reads a lot. They thought that they were doing, in media terms, they thought that they were doing quite well until this Paterson thing happened, and that he'd had a good press out of COP, which generally he had that launch weekend. Biden looked irrelevant.
Yeah, I'm not convinced about the headlines this weekend on COP, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. But the story they had told themselves was that they'd actually had pretty good coverage and it had gone relatively well at the launch. I just think that the impact of those Tory MPs thinking, hold on, what am I voting for here? Do this lot know what they're doing? One big consequence of that, which I don't think has yet played out, but which will play out in the press in the next few weeks, is the impact on the Article 16 negotiations and debate. Because I think you have to pose the question.
So it's Northern Ireland.
Yeah, so at the moment.
Oh, that's coming up fast, yeah.
Yeah, the Brits are embroiled in a debate with the European Union about renegotiating the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, until now, Number 10 and the Brexit team led by David Frost have been able to assume, well, they've got a majority of 80, they can kind of do whatever they want. But I think if you look at the dynamics now of Parliament and what went wrong over the Paterson business, even a majority of 80, I mean, their majority was slashed to 13 on that vote, I think. So you don't
Squeaky bum time.
You don't need to lose a vote.
Yeah.
There could be a debate after you've issued the statutory instrument saying that's it, triggering Article 16. What if the Lords does something? What if respected MPs like Greg Clark or others say, hold on a minute, how long is this trade war with France lasting for? What are the terms on which it's going to be finished?
Well, there's also a number of Tories who hold what I hope is not an old-fashioned view, that a country does stick by its international agreements. Otherwise, it is known on the international stage as being untrustworthy.
That's a crazy idea. Could that catch on? That idea? But yes, so I think it does limit their freedom of maneuver. It's interesting. Frost has moved back to trying to be the Times. Bruno Waterfield reported this morning has moved back to being slightly more conciliatory and saying wants to do a deal with the EU because
they've offered concessions.
Does it have the numbers for a trade war to sustain a trade war for the next year at a time when inflation's rising, all sorts of stresses and strains? I'm not sure the Treasury would put up with it either.
Going back to press again, I'm very conscious it's press review, but whenever I watch the press reviews on telly, I think that isn't a press review. That's just a headline, and then you're talking about your opinion. Whereas I actually like it if someone can say, "Yeah, they've put it on page 3, and this journalist here is just tell me something and pull back the curtain a little bit about." Anyway, what was I going to say?
Well, you're making me feel guilty because you're absolutely right, Tim. And we try.
Well, no, I didn't mean you, editor. No, just let me finish the point. Sorry. When it came to fish and France, I think you can get away with a few sort of headlines because bashing the French, you've got a reasonably large constituency in the UK. That I think when you're messing with people's lives, potentially life and death issue of Northern Ireland, I think that the headlines will be less forgiving, even if it is a row with France, which essentially it is, because at the base of it is Macron's view of strategic autonomy via the EU, vis-a-vis not having having their own foreign policy, and those Anglo-Saxons that are kowtowing to the Americans and trying to get out into the deep blue ocean. They cannot do that because you have to show that if you leave the EU, you get punished, which is part of the French. But it's a French the row, that's the fish row. But it is about that much bigger picture. And I think the headlines when it comes to Northern Ireland will be more sceptical.
But also track what the Sun and the Mail are doing. But both were very...
Ambassadors used to say to me after we finished the Ferrero Rocher, they used to say, especially new ones, not, I wasn't, best buddies with every single ambassador, but occasionally a new one, if I did meet them, would say, what do you think I should read? And I'd go through a whole bunch of stuff about it. And then I'd say, and I think you should read The Sun Says. What? This tabloid? Yeah, I think you should read The Sun, but also read The Sun Says.
Agreed.
Because, well, for various reasons that you understand about how important it is and how Downing Street looks at it, and actually it does hold a bit of sway, not as much in the fractured media we have. And then they were always astonished, but I think it still holds. Have a look at what.
So the Sun is being very, very aggressive and robust, and is a must read on the government. The Mail similarly. I just wanted to flag up that piece from Bruno Waterfield and Oliver Wright, which is in the Times on Friday. We want a deal on Northern Ireland Protocol. Frost tells EU in bid to calm tension. So they are moving. As Bruno and Oliver explained, they're moving to try and take the heat out of it. I think, you might, if you were a conspiracy theorist, you'd say, well, surely a trade war triggering Article 16, scrapping the protocol, tariffs with France, all the rest of it. Well, that means that papers like the Sun and the Mail would then be back on side. So it's a solution to a problem. It's not, because a trade war could last for quite a long time, be extremely messy would be the concern. And I think the thing to watch out for is if they do go for it on Article 16, I'm not convinced that they will. I think they'll carry on negotiating. Then Brexit is undone. Now Britain's then outside the European Union, but the Brexit deal, which was said to be oven ready and the greatest deal ever, and the basis on which the 2019 general election was fought, is null and void. That deal's a goner, and you're into an open-ended and potentially expensive trade war. So I don't think they have quite as much room for manoeuvre as they thought.
I mean, that is, I agree with you on the economics of that. And then, as I understand it, there is then a hard border on the island of Ireland. And at that point, you are risking, I mean, there's already violence. It's never really completely gone away, but you could see it come back. And
but then the British wouldn't impose it, but then it would create create a dilemma for the European Union. But we'll see. So thank you very much for joining me, Tim Martin,
Thank you.
for this special edition of Press Review. As Tim says, we wandered off, hopefully, in a very interesting direction into discussing all manner of things related to geopolitics and politics. But at the heart of it, Press Review is a program where we highlight the stories and coverage, columnists, sometimes podcasts as well, things that have grabbed our attention in the last week or so. I'm Iain Martin, editor of Reaction. And until next time, thank you very much for watching and listening.